everyone, this is JaneTaff the Sage.
And Deanna Vestal, your career catalyst.
And
Weston from Breathing Space, your guest today.
It is so great to be here on our Lipstick Leadership Legacy podcast. We're excited to have our guest Jill because we are infinitely curious about self-care. And Jill is a practitioner of something, we're going to have her explain it, that we believe you can add into your self-care toolbox. And so we're going to get into it with our guest and follow us along for the discussion. So welcome, Jill.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm grateful to be here with both of you.
Yeah. Now, I know that you and Deanna have known each other for a while. How did you get to know each other?
Whew, that's a good question. We were community members and saw each other through mutual friends. And as my career grew in the recruiting space of healthcare practitioners, and as Jill was coming out from her formal career, coming into the healthcare space, we started to see each other more often. What do you say, Jill?
I was going to say Jane started with talking about self-care, and it came through self-care in the yoga industry, the health industry. And I have tended as a business owner to always be attracted to people that just feel good, that think like I do. I think we're going to talk later. You know, for me, some of that is self-care. As I was starting my business, it was, who do I want to be mentors? Who do I want to be around me and to be my peers? And Deanna's just thoughtful and heart-led and easy. So we've stayed connected off and on. And when she asked me to do this, it was an instant yes because of who she is. So.
That. Jane, also in the last 4 or 5 months, I have been drawn even more in my spiritual practice to find everyday experiences to help me cope with grief and loss and thoughts around how things might never get better. And being someone who, even when I look in the mirror, my own perception of me is lighthearted, fun, engaging, supportive. And for the first time in my life, feeling that I did not have access to those things. It was very, very enlightening for me to scroll through and see Jill posting more regularly. And the story, what had happened was an actual story that she was chronicling day by day. And I not only was my spirit lifted, but I felt a Me Too moment. Like, oh my gosh, how do you chronicle the end of something as a treasure? So can you share a little bit more about what you were sharing on Instagram, Jill?
Sure. Thank you for that prompt. So I opened my business almost 6-7 years ago, kind of inadvertently. I knew that I wanted to offer this practice of mindfulness, meditation, and specifically yoga nidra. Went looking for a place to rent, and my intuition and I just said yes, and actually bought a commercial space. So I had the commercial space for about 3 years before COVID. And as many of you know, with COVID, it was a little different and difficult based on the mandates. We were open one moment and not the next. Even for my business, I was loosely categorized as a yoga studio. So I was trying to follow those mandates, but sometimes that meant I could be at 10% of capacity, which might mean 1.7 people. And then other times I would hear, no, you really can't be open at all, but you can be open outdoors. Then I would move a class outdoors and they're like, well, we're not sure if your yoga's like we. So I kept trying and didn't feel it was surmountable. And I also went online, but it was probably in November, I really started looking at, should I keep my physical space or not? So the overhead was mounting. The way I run my business, I want it very accessible. So my classes are only $10 per person for a group class, different for private. And I thought, here's a business model. I could raise my prices. I could send out more emails. I could, try to go out and capture people and bring them in, but that's just not really, the name of my business is Breathing Space, and that's just not my nature. And I want my business to kind of sit here, and when people are ready, they find it. So I ended up I sat one day and it just came to me clearly, like, you need to let go of the business space, wait out COVID, and then carry on. So I'm not big on posting a lot on Instagram. Again, the nature of the work that I do is I don't want to be another person that's keeping someone's brain too full or kind of telling people what to do, which is all fine, but I just don't post that much. And again, I was sitting at night and I was like, this is kind of a little bit of the end of something. And I thought, well, a lot more people are finding me because I was online. And some people didn't know my story. So it just came to me to do maybe 4 posts, 4 days in a row of kind of the before and after. And this was then, and this is now. I don't feel like I'm a great writer or a great storyteller, but the words just flew out and I found some pictures that fit. And most of I think the theme, and it's always been true for me, is paying attention and saying yes to things. So I just kind of made that the theme of the 4 days post of, if you can get quiet and see what you want for yourself, and even during this difficult time, say yes to more things. And it attracted quite a few people reading and having questions.
Well, because for some of us who have actually had a love for the communal space, and it was so, there was so much energy there and it seemed to be full like all the time. I don't know how that works when I had never heard of breathing as a business outside of yoga. And COVID, there was so much, there were so many different forms of loss and grief and change and transition and forced new normals. So when you started sharing by picture and experience with like little short Instagram paragraphs about the beauty of saying yes, and it was showing how full the space always was, and never one time in those days were you talking about loss or grief. And it was just, I wanted to help in some way. And then when I was prompted to help, right? And found that you were providing services online everywhere. And I started signing up for different services that you were, and sleeping better, being able to concentrate more. And it was really such an integral part of my own healing and self-discovery journey that brought mindfulness to a whole new level. Sometimes things that we do, practices that we do to either survive or cope, as said before, can also become cliche and also become kind of group thinkish, so that everyone in your crowd is like, no, 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 don't say anything negative. Well, you just told me not to, that's negative, right? That the attitude about gratitude. Well, in Nidra, it has nothing to do about what we should do, what we could do in life, how we could approach anything. It is genuinely an attention to being. And one of my very best girlfriends and associates in business, God rest her soul, Phyllis Clements, my angel wings, had passed in February, and that was one of those that's it moments for me. And so when Nidra came back into my everyday experience, it was just such a beautiful way to embrace my being. Oh, I was gonna say too that Phyllis just so happens to be a being practitioner. And I have taken on her angel wings, and then Nidra was reintroduced to me through your practices. And I'm so honored now that in such a short time we've been able to connect, the three of us, and really bring more of your work to our community. Can you talk to us about what Nidra is and how you were, because I knew you in corporate and it's a vast difference. Can we talk a little bit about the transition and what Nidra is?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's curious. I went from training horses at 14 to working in juvenile corrections with both offenders and crime victims for almost 30 years. And then I practiced physical yoga. So usually when I tell people all of those things, they're like, why do you always mention that together? And what does training horses have to do with working with people incarcerated and helping them, figure out what they have done, the harm they've caused, working with victims? And a lot of it, I have always been like a pretty quiet, easygoing person. People look to me to kind of balance things out. Even in corrections, I was called like Chilly Jilly, like, go get Jill because she'll fix things. Go get Jill, she'll figure this out. And I didn't realize growing up, but I found partly when I had to write about my business, realizing that when I worked with those horses, those were the horses that were, for lack of a better word, just kind of wild. So they either had been mistreated or maybe someone had not been able to get a hold of them, like literally to put a halter on them in years. Again, usually abused or mishandled. And it was like, give that horse to Jill. And like, kind of magically the horse would start to pay attention. But I learned pieces about that in working with people, and that was to literally sometimes sit still and to be still and to watch and listen. So with horses, I learned, if the horse wouldn't come to you, you can run into the stall or run into the pasture and have a whip and have a rope and do all those things. And again, I'm not putting anybody down that does any of that. But I learned that if I would sit quietly, horses would literally turn around and look at me. And then they would soften their jaw and they might cock an ear forward like, yes, what do you want? And so there were horses, sometimes I would sit for months in a pasture with them before they would come to me. And it was just like an energy and an unspoken word. Fast forward to working in corrections, the same thing. I saw people, muscling and shouting both ways, lots of loud voices and maybe intimidating with the body. And I thought, well, I'm not 6'3" and 300 pounds and, and have all this muscle. Plus I wasn't experienced. So I would sit back and watch, and I would figure out how to talk to people and how to gain their cooperation, how to gain their respect. So when I got just as I was getting out of corrections, I knew I wanted to be of service. I felt like I was of service with the horses. I was of service in corrections. And again, I literally sat still. I stood still in the middle of my kitchen. I was like, wow, I'm retiring. How am I going to be of service? Not, oh, how am I going to make money? Or like, I was like, my mom and dad have always taught me to be helpful. I'm like, I don't want to just sit on my couch. And I was like, how do I be helpful? So that's a whole nother show of caretaking my dad. That was being of service. But in the interim, I still don't know where I got the flyer. I was not on the mailing list for the place that offered the Yoga Nidra certification. I'm pretty analytical, plan things out. I'm thrifty with my money. I signed up to go to this Yoga Nidra teacher training without ever experiencing a Yoga Nidra class. So I was committing to something. I was putting out money. I was driving up to Grass Valley, Nevada City, a place I'd never been. As I'm driving down the road, I'm like, what am I doing? And there was like a little whisper of like, just say yes and do this. So fast forward, the very first session I had, I absolutely loved just that sense of both being in my body, but not being weighed down by my body. My to-do list had shut off. I just had this sense of freedom and awareness in a very non-threatening, easy way. So again, I had practiced physical yoga for a long time, but again, I wasn't sitting around chanting. I didn't know all the sacred work behind it. So when I experienced something that just felt really comfortable for me in Yoga Nidra, I was like, I want other middle of the road regular people to feel this. So again, I still don't know how I got there, but came home and decided to start teaching it. And then once my dad had passed away, more and more people said, you really need to teach more of that yoga nidra. I need yoga nidra. I just had, cancer diagnosis. I had this happen, that happened. And I was like, oh, this is the new way that I am to be of service. So that's how I got into the business. Also, real quick, and then I'll share what Yoga Nidra is. I rented space from different people because I was not that confident. Didn't know how to run a business. I used to do stand-up training in corrections, and I have never, to this day, I still don't like my voice. And it was funny having so many people say, your voice is soothing and it feels healing, and like, just talk to me and do Yoga Nidra. So I thought, you know what, I need to say yes to this. I need to listen to what people are asking for because I want to be of service. So instead of renting here and there from people, I said, you know what, let me go look for my own space. Just let me see what that experience feels like. Well, I meant to rent a space monthly, looked at one space, didn't feel right, went home. Again, for some unknown reason, I'm looking at commercial real estate. Now, I knew residential real estate, didn't know commercial. Within a week, I had bought a commercial space to do Yoga Nidra, and my business was already name breathing space, but really all I did in there was mindfulness. So one of my friends, she was very sad when I sold. She's like, but I tell people you're the only like strictly mindfulness studio I know of, because most people will mix, mindfulness with yoga and maybe Pilates and many different things. And I was committed, it's going to be a quiet, peaceful, non-sweaty place. And that's what I'm going to do. And part of the reason that I wanted that is in Yoga Nidra, it's really the practice of going deep within. So scientifically, you go from a beta brainwave state. We're in beta right now. We're thinking, we're processing, we're realizing that we're talking. Listeners are realizing that they're listening, and they're, maybe keeping an ear out for information. In Yoga Nidra, through a guided body scan, you go into deep relaxation. So I am talking you through having you become aware of your body. You're releasing tension. That thinking brain starts to go, you know what, I don't need to think so much. There's not so much to plan. I can't even see things that need planning. And you move into what's called theta and alpha. And that's a combination brainwave state where you're more creative. It is meditative, but you're not going to sleep. And in Yoga Nidra, it's really nice that you are guided so your mind tends not to wander, because I'm constantly saying, notice your wrist, notice your elbow, letting go, letting go, letting go. So I keep your busy brain occupied so it can let go and become less protective. And in that state, you start to let go of maybe messages or stories like, oh, you could never have a podcast. You could never have a bit. Come on, it's COVID. You're not smart enough. You're too this, you're too that. You don't have money.
Those tapes that play in our head without our initiation.
Yes. So you're both going into a more relaxed, more aware state where your subconscious is kind of even remembering that that's a story, because sometimes we're on automatic behavior. Oh, I just do what I do. That's just how I am. I'm just an upbeat person. I'm just a depressed person. And there's more underneath it than that. So in Yoga Nidra, you literally have some of these answers by your body relaxing, your nervous system letting down. And then towards the end of the session, once you're nice and relaxed, there's a prompt of see yourself whole. There's a visualization, or what we call a sankalpa, which is an intention setting. So again, we're not bypassing. Let's say that someone comes in and they're depressed. The goal of Yoga Nidra is not, kind of, Deanna, as you mentioned, is not to say, okay, I'm just going to put a smile on my face. I'm not going to be depressed. If you have a cancer diagnosis, we're not saying the cancer goes away. However, one person I worked with, we got done and she goes, oh my gosh, Jill, I see and feel my cancer cells smiling at me. Oh. And I was like, what did you say? So she knew this was not about curing her cancer, but the idea is when there's trauma, when there's tragedy, when there's simple, maybe indecision about your business, can you be in a mode where you can access answers, access some stability, access your heart's desire, and respond rather than reacting? So when she said, oh, I see my cancer cells smiling at me, she's like, because I've always hated having cancer in my body and I thought about fighting it. She said, why would I fight my own body? She's like, I want to see them smiling at me and I can work with that. So in yoga nidra, you move out of this everyday hustle bustle. I'm not good enough. I can't, I'm not sure. I need to be like everybody else. And I call it accessing your heart's desire.
I really like that.
You lay down with a pillow. I gave a session to you guys just before this. You lay down with a pillow, cover yourself up with a blanket. You listen to a facilitator and you go into this state of mind and awareness where you can access what you need.
Yeah, and really in my mind, just with your description, because I'm the relationship person, I'm looking for anything. And what I'm hearing is you are tapping into a relationship with yourself you may have never had before. And, just like the gal you mentioned who had a new relationship because she had a chosen relationship with cancer. And then in her session with you, she learned from her own body to have a different relationship by engaging in the stillness, engaging in the scan. I love how you say that. And it's so true, how much we miss in fullness of living by living outside of our bodies. And we had a brief conversation about that during our session, but it's becoming so poignant right now where, where we are living in fairly anxious times culturally, where we can really get outside of our body and engage in that destructive mental, physical, spiritual behavior of pitting ourselves against ourselves, doing battle with the world, denying yourself of the true feelings you have in the moment. And I really, really love, at least in my mind, the picture of kind of reaching across to yourself in whatever it is that comes up and saying, there you are. I really love that.
They're reaching across. And even like when I suggest to people accessing your heart's desire or remembering, to me, it's not a cliche that everything that we need is within. 100% though, it's difficult to access it. And it doesn't mean that it's magical or necessarily all mystical. Just think, for our listeners, if you were so busy just in everyday life, trying to hang in there, trying to succeed, trying to get through a day, trying to get through a year, trying to
make it happen
out Zoom, trying to raise your kids, it does feel like that's all that there is. So in yoga nidra and in other mindfulness and even meditative practices, we're not saying go sit in a cave and your kids will magically figure everything out and your business will flourish and you'll have happiness. But it's, as you said, Jane, reaching across to kind of that forgotten self and going, wait a minute, what do you want? We mentioned earlier, when I decided to sell the business, it came to me and I was very clear. I was like, this doesn't make sense for you to keep the space. You're kind of done with it. I appreciated it. I loved it, which sparked the Instagram post. And I had several people that were like, no, you can't sell breathing. Like, that's my sanctuary. And I love the story of how you made it happen. If I had not been still and very clear with myself, and I did yoga nidra sessions, I might have listened to all those people. And they weren't wrong on what they were saying. Like most of them, especially those who knew me, like they loved me and they loved the place, but they were coming from their perspective and their stories. I had to go back to my story and what I know, again, when I'm in that calm, relaxed state, not the beta thinking state. I'm like, if I sell it, I can buy something again. When I sold it, I knew that wasn't the end of doing classes. It was just a shift and a change. So yes, if you've had a traumatic experience, if you've experienced grief, I'm not saying it's simply that easy, but if you can be in a state where you can go, what do I need most right now? what do I need to do, even in a tragic situation, that little glimpse of what do I need to do right now can just be really, really helpful. And then more in everyday life, obviously, if you're responding, versus reacting, to me, you're better within yourself, you're better with your loved ones, you're even better with strangers, because again, that's a whole nother thing. I just have a lot of concerns right now where there's so many facts, so many opinions about so many things, and also so many comments and people's responses. And it's like, can we just, again, move out of that thinking reactive state sometimes and go, what's really going on in this situation? Not even really what's going on. What am I feeling in this situation, and how do I want to respond to that person? And I learned and watched a lot of that in the correctional facilities. Sometimes there'd be a fight over somebody stepping on someone's shoe. And I was like, what was that? Well, he disrespected me. I'm like, let's talk about that. How is that being disrespectful that he stepped on your shoe? Well, he should have seen my foot there, and he only did it because. So we would, untangle all of that. And I was like, what is really going on? Well, man, when I was growing up, my mom and dad, or someone always said, if an offender came up and asked for a toothbrush or asked for clothing, and I said no, sometimes it would launch into this whole behavioral stuff. And then we would sit down, and he was like, well, I don't like being told no. And I would say, tell me more about that. And so, again, to me, when you're mindful, you're just better with yourself, and you're better with your immediate community and your family, and then you're better with other people. So that's also how I like to be of service.
Well, I really, really enjoy your take on this, because now you're bringing in other elements that we've also talked about, because this is a different way of approaching emotional intelligence too, because it comes at it from a total me-centered, and I'm not talking about me ego, I'm talking about my physical location and my heart orientation. It's so interesting, because emotional intelligence is an intellectual exercise. But what you're proposing and what you are practicing gets my body and my spirit engaged, which we need more than the intellectual exercise.
Or even I would offer, because there's so many practices that to me are not exclusive, and some people take to them easier. Sometimes I think before you can access emotional intelligence, like, again, I just shared a story of, saying to someone, gosh, why did that trigger you? And a lot of times people will say, oh, I don't know, that's just how I am. So when we do something with our bodies somatic, like sometimes I will say, can you put your hand over your heart or your hand over your chest, and then think about it a little bit and tell me? And people are like, oh yeah. Or I'm not mad. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. And so to say to somebody, instead of, oh, would you be still? What are your hands saying right now? Well, are you sure you're fine? Like, why is your hand right here? Well, something's just like really, really, really on my mind. And so watching, if we can feel our own bodies, like I think a lot of times as women, no, I'm fine, I've got this. No, I'm fine. Okay, but it really doesn't look like that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm fine.
Yeah, there's a lot of trying to convince ourselves that our words, we're saying the words to try and convince our bodies.
Yeah.
That incongruency I find very fascinating. So I'm glad you're bringing that up, because it's true. How we hold ourselves is really what our body is saying to us, and we're not acknowledging it. We're not reaching across and saying, I get you. I am an image-based thinker, and I just really am seeing clearer and clearer how this really helps you get to know you, and it sounds so crazy. I'm not crazy, but it sounds very complicated. But truly, if you over intellectualize it, Yes, it's absolutely complicated because we're complex.
Yes.
We're not simple. And the practice, once you get the experience, and this is why I so appreciate you, Jill, because you gave us a session so that we will know inside our bodies before our recording today what it means and what it meant for us. For me especially, I've done physical yoga in the past, and I think I told you immediately after, wow, my mind has never gotten this quiet in a regular yoga session. You know, I had a lot of mental clutter and a lot of mental disturbance, right? Just my mind saying all kinds of things. The mind chatter was incessant. But for yoga nidra, it was so quiet and still. And I know that's because where I am emotionally, spiritually in my life. You know, I have a very still, calm lifestyle. And, you know, even before our session, I came running in from a meeting and I could get into that stillness. The second you introduced it, I can get, you know, my mind was still and it felt good.
Yeah.
Like to shake the hand of that still person.
I love that reaching across. Yeah, the image.
Yeah.
And I'd like to also speak to that because Jane and I are getting to know each other more as podcast hosts,
Yeah.
co-hosts. I have gotten the chance to hear more about the stillness in your lifestyle. And ironically, I'm one of the businesses that got busier at the onset of COVID. And, you know, I also am one of the people who really relied on my faith and my beliefs that I'm a go-getter, I make it happen. Um, and I still am those things. I mean, in my disc profile, I'm just as dominant as I am
Yeah.
conscientious or people-centered. And yet, there, for those of us who are super duper busy or were, and are juggling life and experience and the new normal, uh, and really focused on staying up, keeping afloat, being prepared, there is a crash. There was a crash for me. And I still am a woman of faith. And in faith practices, there is tomorrow. You know, it's about holding on with the faith of tomorrow, better times.
Mm-hmm.
And with both yoga and yoga nidra, there's an opportunity to be okay in the moment. And that is quite different. That is not distracting. It is much, much more accepting. And although I have felt very spiritual my entire life, I really did not know what it meant to be present in the body. I had not, you know, how does that make you feel? I'm pissed. You know, that was it. I don't, what do you mean, how do I feel? Let's drink some wine and then I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And, you know, now I'm tipsy. How do I feel? Great.
Yeah.
These still are not actual feelings. And I never before would have honestly known that my migraines were related to an inability to really process, or that my shoulder pain would go away simply by engaging in proper breathing. I had such a relief, such a sense of relief that instead of figuring something out, I could actually identify who I am physically by closing my eyes and feeling. I mean, you know, like I couldn't feel my wrists. What do you mean feel my wrists? Like I have to open my eyes now because I have to see them. I can see them. I cannot feel them. Yes, you can. You can even feel your earlobes. You can feel the trillions of cells operating behind the scenes on our behalf to keep you alive, actually, with some centered focus around our breathing and practice. And then as we were saying, like not the result of, but in conjunction with our thought processes, our reaction is now a response.
Mhm.
This is not something you have to work on anymore.
Right.
This is where preparation meets opportunity. Is that the saying?
Mhm.
Right? In simply engaging with guided, facilitated mindfulness,
Mhm.
emotional intelligence is a byproduct. And you really get to experience that in a crisis or in a trigger. And for those of us who are too busy to be triggered, like me, I don't have any triggers. Are you kidding me? But then I am always selling or maybe telling somebody off when, oh, I don't know. And actually, those are trigger responses. And arguments or discord in personal relationships, those are trigger responses. And in those moments, we're not necessarily our best selves or mature either, right? So someone who studies and trains other leaders in crucial conversations, in managing productivity, and then suddenly cannot have a conversation without arguing or crying, that's a lost state.
Mhm.
And what I love, one last thing before I ask another question about what I really love in the experience is that we get the opportunity to hit rock bottom. You don't have to admit it anymore or hide it, quote, end quote, hide it. We actually get the experience of being present with our worst, with the worst thing, the unthinkable. And not everyone needs to hit the bottom before choosing a mindfulness practice. Why? Because every single person who breathes has cells working on our behalf that could help us to regulate our responses to life or show up in ways that are more natural. And I cannot get over the community where you can meet people and engage, like how you are saying, your life is calm and you are able to engage immediately. My
Mhm.
life is not calm and I'm able to engage also. And
Thank
then
God.
we can, yes, and then we can build a relationship around the experience afterwards.
Yeah.
Jill, can you tell us more about what the power of the breath and maybe some of the science around, this very basic, this is how we stay alive. Everyone's breathing, right?
Yeah, and it's funny sometimes because like I took a certification to be a breath coach. I don't do all of that necessarily. But sometimes people will say, can I hire you to teach me how to breathe? And I'll always start with, well, I think you're already breathing. They're like, but I don't feel like I am. And so, yeah, breath is something that obviously it's all there. And when we're born as babies, we actually breathe differently than how we breathe now. And I know we're going to start to wind up, but I'll actually, maybe as part of this, I'll show a quick breathing technique that I think is a good tip. When we're babies, we breathe differently. And we change as adults because we have more of the real world. So we are seeing things and we're hearing things and there's things to do and places to go and our breathing changes. But basically, there's lots in there. I'm not an expert. We have something called the vagus nerve, V as in Victor, AGUS, and the vagus nerve runs down through our entire body. And it's think of it almost kind of like a computer. And it tells us, be afraid, don't be afraid, something's wrong, we need something to compensate. So if you imagine that different parts of your organs, different parts of your brain, different parts of your cells are like listening and responding to keep you safe, your breath is as best I know, your breath kind of it either initiates that or interrupts. So if we're scared, if we're concerned, if we're about to freak out over something and we can get to our breath can send that signal, and our vagus nerve will do its job and go, wait, is there danger? Is there a dinosaur from, because that's usually the example I give, like in caveman times, people need to be alerted to run away from the saber-toothed tiger. Mm-hmm. In everyday life, we have to go, oh, is that a saber-toothed tiger? So even like when your phone rang, I didn't startle, and I didn't have a need to go, oh my God, Deanna, you ruined my, I was like, oh, there's a phone ringing. And I just waited and you stopped it. So if we treat that phone like a saber-toothed tiger and go, Deanna, what are you? Mm-hmm. Now the body's going, oh my God, that wasn't just a phone, must be. Versus we're like, oh, wait. And the reason I motion sitting up, as I breathe, I can suddenly see better. I can maybe hear better. I'm like, oh, look, there's a phone, and it's just a phone. So the breath literally, either before or after, in the middle of an incident, tells our body, what do we need to do? So if we do see a threat, we're like, okay, it is a threat. Then the adrenaline as a hormone comes up and says, get ready, run, protect yourself, protect the child, grab your kid's hand from putting on the hot stove, hit the brake. Mm-hmm. So again, none of this is bypassing. None of this is saying you should not be emotional. But if you think the phone is always a dinosaur, you're going to be in this state all day long. So when we breathe, it literally sends that signal. And real quick, I love a 4-8 pattern. So when you feel the need to balance back down, it's actually called a balanced breath. You're going to inhale for 4 through the nose and exhale for 8, if you can, through the nose as well. Ooh. Now the 8 exhale can be long when you first start. I love it. I can probably do like a 16 exhale because I'm just quiet and I love to breathe. But I would say right now, for those of you who are listening and not driving, I'll guide you through real quick, and we're going to inhale for 4 and exhale for 8 if you can. And the reason that you're going to go in through your nose and out through your nose is that you have to pay a little more attention than just going through your nose and going. It's not bad to exhale through your mouth, but this takes a little more noticing. So just go ahead and settle yourself for a minute. Again, if you're listening and driving, please don't do this till you get home, but just settle in, and you're going to inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. Quick hold, and exhale for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Inhale again through the nose if you can for 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale for 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. And then just notice how you feel, and then go back to regular breathing. And sometimes I even say maybe put your hand on your chest or your heart and just notice. Mm-hmm. Go back.
I love that. And that is balance breathing.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh,
it's called different things in different practices. Many of the practices, that may be someone that says, well, I thought it was called this, and I thought it was 6, and I thought it was 3. I suggest to people, do what is affordable, what is accessible, count any way you want initially, just so your body starts to do it. You can imagine there's another one called box breathing, and the idea with box is you're breathing up to a certain count, over, across, and down. There's a triangle. You said you love images. Do any practice that catches your eye, catches your heart, and feels accessible. And then when you dive in deeper, other people would disagree, but when you dive in deeper, you can see if it's like the correct way. And I just always tell people, see how your body feels. Because for some people, the 8 count, they're like, okay, now I'm really, really anxious. I'm like, well, that's not the point. Inhale for 4 and exhale however you want to. Mm-hmm. Because the point is, what is your body telling you to do?
Yeah. And I think really the point about breathing in general with a count is that you're paying attention, that you're in your body, and it doesn't matter what you call it, how you count it. The fact that you are mindful and engaged in it, because we're going to breathe. And when you're paying attention, it does different things for you. You access oxygen in a whole uh, more efficient way, right? When you're inhaling and exhaling on purpose, on a time. And that's what I love about focused breathing, however that lands for you.
And
But
there is a science sometimes behind certain counts, and even that it was the first time that I understood when I took this course that, our number one, some of the purpose isn't even necessarily oxygen, and that was new to me. But the idea again is when you're first starting, just be aware that you need to take some breaths, either slower or faster, and be aware there's even breath work that can energize you. Like, I'm a pretty quiet, slow moving person. There's an energetic kapha body or breath of fire that right before a phone call where you need to be on point, you can also breathe faster.
yeah, yeah. Breathing. I mean, it's simple, but it's not easy to be mindful with it. And so thank you, Jill, for giving us a fantastic, useful tip that every single person can use. Thank you for doing your work. We're always looking out for amazing entrepreneurs and business owners who are in service to individuals who otherwise have exhausted all of their resources and knowledge. And this is just another level of saying, let's get back in touch. Let's tap back into our bodies. Wow, what about that? So, any last words, Deanna, and then we'll sign off.
Absolutely. So speaking of getting in touch, how will we get in touch with you, Jill?
Sure, thanks for asking. So the name of the business is Breathing Space. The website is Our Breathing Space because the other one wasn't available. So pretty much everything is there on the website. I'm also on an app called Insight Timer, INSIGHT Timer. That's on the website as well, that link. And Insight Timer is the #1 free app for stress and anxiety. It's not my app, but I'm a teacher on there. And so I have recordings. If you have difficulty sleeping, there's a very popular meditation called Sweet Surrender. There's one for anxiety, one for focus. And then usually twice a month, I do a live yoga nidra session on the app. Again, the app is free, and then everything else is donation based. But the main place is the website. I post a little on Instagram here and there.
I'd like to add that if you visit the website, listeners, and put your information in the info section, then these wonderful reminders and invitations come directly to your email, and not all the time, but definitely consistently. And what a treasure, because you do a lot of work in the nonprofit sector. You absolutely make your group work accessible to all. And so for some of us who are looking for creative ways to give back now, by following you, I've gained some insights about like Boxables or the other nonprofit that I found out about because I got an email. And so that is very insightful and could be an affordable way for those of us who want to have guided mindfulness and yet want to be able to afford it.
Thank you
Yeah.
for mentioning that.
Yeah.
Also the work that I do, I don't want it to be scary for anybody. So if someone has tried yoga and didn't like it, maybe they did some meditation, they were chanting, they're like, oh, I don't think that's for me. I really do want things to be accessible and affordable, and to feel like you could get your feet wet with some of it. So
Yeah, for as someone who's more on the conservative side with practices and whatnot, I can say from my own perspective, completely accessible. is not anxiety creating in the least. And you're a wonderful guide, Jill. So from one conservative mindset to whoever you are out there who may think, I can't try that, that's crazy. It's amazing. It's amazing. So if they need an endorsement, they can use me as a example, because I thought it was fabulous. So thank you so much, Jill, for being our guest today and talking through with our listeners what exactly you do. And we love having met another amazing boss babe and entrepreneur. And please, listeners, check out Breathing Space with Jill. And we'd love for you to, share in the practice. This is JaneTaff the Sage.
And Deanna Vestal, your career catalyst.
And Jill Weston from Breathing Space.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.